welcome to the 8th WeShyft Lunchtime webinar. Super happy to welcome all of you. My name is Colin. I'm the co-founder of the SaaS ESG platform WeShyft. WeShyft enables companies to efficiently integrate data, compile ESG reports, and get measures on how to improve along certain KPIs. Today, we will talk about the very foundation of sustainability reporting, because today we want to talk about data and data management. Everybody who has tried to compile a sustainability report knows that collecting data, consolidating data is one of the greatest challenges in the reporting process, especially if you want to automate data collection and automate your workflows. And today we are happy because we will provide insights into how to build a data architecture that enables a fully automation of data processes along reporting frameworks, such as the GRI, for example. But not only that, we will also give an idea on what to do if the data is published, because we're gonna hear from the platform WikiRates how to assess data, for example, how to benchmark data. And I'm very happy to provide these insights to you with the following speakers. We have two high experts in the field again. We have Dr. Heinrich Czochohaj, who is the Managing Director and Chief Sustainability Officer at the Business Technology Consulting AG. Super happy to welcome you, Heiner. Thanks for taking the time and offering your insights to the audience.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me here, Colin.
And we welcome Lorien van Breen. Lorien is a managing director at the WikiRates platform. WikiRates, for me personally, has been one of the discoveries in the last year. I was amazed what you guys have accomplished here, and I'm very happy that you are going to present the WikiRates platform to the audience. Thank you so much for being here, Lorien, and taking the time.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And thank you all so much for accommodating with English as well, as my German doesn't go far enough to explain the intricacies of automation and data.
Perfect. Yeah, I think everybody by this point has probably realized this time it's an English edition of the webinar, but it's great because I saw in the audience that we have some English-speaking participants here that would have been excluded if we would have done it in German. Maybe two more sentences about how the next 45 to 60 minutes are organized. We will have two presentations. Both of them will be roughly 10 minutes long, and then we will start with a Q&A session. For the Q&A session, I highly encourage you to use the Q&A tool. You find it in the navigation bar below in the Zoom navigation. If you have any questions while the two speakers are presenting, just type them in there and I will collect all the questions and try to give them to the two speakers in the Q&A session. And finally, you can download the two presentations. I am going to share the link for the download in the chat box. So just open the chat box, hit the link, and you need to assign to our newsletter, and then you'll get both of the presentations. Okay, without any further ado, I'm super excited, Lorien, sorry, that you will start. Yeah, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And thanks to everybody for coming and taking some time today to spend your lunch with us. So yeah, I'm gonna just be talking you through what WikiRate is, how we've come about, what we're doing, and really also what the usefulness might be of a tool like this for you. So to start out, WikiRate is an open data platform that brings together data about companies, particularly about their social and environmental performance, or also known as ESG data. And we try to clean that, standardize that best as we can so that it becomes accessible, comparable, and we make that freely available to anyone. Now, why are we doing this? About 10 years ago almost, our founder, Philip Heerge, who works in sustainable finance, said, well, if I want to get an overview of what companies are doing in terms of their financial performance, it's incredibly easy. But when I want to get the same kind of comparison or overview in terms of their social and environmental performance, it's incredibly difficult. I'm either running into having to go to lots of different websites, dig up PDF reports of hundreds of pages, and then dig through all these lengthy text reports to then pull out little bits of information and then do that all over again with another company to try and find the same information. Or I need to go to a big portal where I pay very large fees, which of course some of the stakeholders that companies have, like investors, can do, but the public, how are they supposed to do that? And really all of this information is already available in the public domain. So his vision really was to make this data available to anyone for free and really make this public resource truly public again. And with that mandate, WikiRate started. Now, of course, that's a lot easier said than done, and you get into lots of complicated issues quite quickly. Simple things like, or things that seem simple, things like, what is a company? So if I say Coca-Cola, we all think of the one, and yet there's hundreds of entities, and depending on what particular issue area I'm looking at, I might be interested in very different entities of the Coca-Cola brand, let's say. So in that sense, we quickly learned that it's a lot more complex than it might seem. And so the tool also needs to account for all of this complexity. Now, how it works is that we integrate with as many databases that already exist. So as many as we can, and that also requires agreements on licensing, because we make everything freely available, API connections, and this is really that automation piece. But we're also starting to now venture into algorithms and how those kinds of tools can help us bring more data into our system. And I'm going to come back to this in just a minute. But the other ways that we do it is also with bulk gathering of data. So think of scraping techniques where it's what we call semi-automated. So you still need a human to participate in that process, but we are talking big volumes of data. And that data needs to be structured in a certain format so that you can actually do those kinds of processing steps. Now, and then we come to the last and most unstructured form of data, which is still these kinds of PDF reports, which has a lot of really good information that we're looking for. But at the same time, an algorithm will need to be developed specifically to kind of parcel that information. And because reporting changes so quickly, often by the time the algorithm works well, it doesn't actually suit the kind of form of disclosure anymore, and it doesn't even work anymore. So in this way, we still really rely on what we call human processing. And this is why WikiRate is a wiki. So we are mobilizing communities of interested stakeholders around these different types of information that we're looking for. And we have a standardized question and answer format where a non-expert is able to use that methodology to extract the information that we're looking for. So think, for instance, of a GRI framework. We work with lots of university groups who use that framework and go through lots of different company reports step by step to extract that information. Now, how that makes us this makes us a little bit different from other data providers in this space, because all of a sudden you're seeing data that isn't maybe ready for use. So when you would, for instance, access a Bloomberg portal, you know, it's gone through their research process, it's gone through their verification process, and it's a neatly packaged data set ready for your use. Now, of course, that doesn't mean there isn't any data quality issues there. Those of you who use it will know that, of course, you still need to do your own checks as well. But what happens on WikiRate is that the data coming in through these kind of crowdsourced projects, really you're seeing a much earlier stage of that data production phase. And so that is really where you can start to get involved as well and say, actually, I don't agree, and update it. And we have the transparency all the way down to the source. So you can see where's the information coming from, who has added it to the WikiRate platform, and then what kind of verification has already been done. Was that done by an expert? Was it done by another non-expert? And things like that. So with all of this work that we've done over the years, we now are past the 3 million data points, and we have data across more than 100,000 companies. Of course, some companies we know a lot about in the public domain, others we know very little about. We might just know that they exist somewhere in a company's supply chain, for instance. So there is quite a lot of variance there, but we gather as much as we can. Now, the automation piece, so having as much of an integration with other databases and algorithms working together, that is really where it gets interesting. And that's where we can even scale beyond what we've already been doing with mobilizing larger communities around this data. And this is where our advocacy work comes in. So WikiRate is not an expert on the different ESG topics. We don't advocate for specific things, human rights, environmental emissions, for instance. So while of course, as individuals, we have opinions about that, that's not our domain of expertise. Our domain of expertise is data, and particularly open data. So we advocate for open data practices, which would allow us to share data more easily between different systems. And we work with the European Union on that front through the EFRAG, which is really working on the new standards that are coming up in the EU. We are advising them on how to structure disclosure for companies so that the information can easily be extracted in automated ways, and that it can actually also be shared more easily between different parties, so that you don't end up with the same roadblocks after a whole new assessment framework has been launched. And I'm happy to also dig in a little bit further into this for those of you who are interested in the Q&A. So then, what is really also different about our data platform is that we are not just relying on data that comes from companies themselves. Of course, this is a very valuable source of information, and the more that companies make available, the better. We really appreciate all of the effort and time and resources that go into this. And yet, if I were to tell you I'm a very good, pleasant person, you might want to also ask someone else if they agree and get a more nuanced picture of who I really am. And so this is really what we're trying to bring to this space as well. We don't just want to hear from companies how they are performing and what their impacts are. We also want to know what other stakeholders think. And so we're bringing this more 360-degree perspective to it and democratizing what is really the impact that a company has on people and planet. And so we're working with journalist reports, civil society reports. We have, as of 2 years now, we have worker rights reports. So actually worker data that is being reported to a civil society group is aggregated and is added as well. And so you can really start to triangulate. And I'll come back to that point in just a minute as well. But just to give you an impression of who is really using this kind of platform. So there's lots of data contributors. There's those that really design the frameworks that are used to assess company impacts. There's those that really use the data that we have to then put out another rating. So it's really wide range of stakeholders. You will see from this as well, if you're a bit familiar with the space, that it's overwhelming majority at the moment is civil society partners. Now, this is because they often don't have the resources to pay for these kinds of tech tools or data platforms to get access. And so they are really the champions in our stakeholder domain at the moment, starting to really work with the tools and the data that we have. But as you see, we also work with GRI and other more established partners. So it's really just a bit of the first steps that the civil society has taken. And now that we have this very big wealth of information, we're starting to see also banks and investors coming around to just quickly take a look. And what is interesting there is that they are looking for data that is not just coming from companies, but is also coming from those other sources, as well as that we are seeing that investors are curious to actually, expand on the research that they've done already. So are there different topics there that they haven't assessed themselves? Or are we actually able to do a broader range of companies than what, for instance, one benchmark has done? So just to give you a quick example of that, the corporate human rights benchmark is a big one, and they actually invite other groups to then use that methodology to look at other companies that they haven't covered themselves in their assessment. So you're really starting to kind of bring all of this information together, and you can start to see what the impact is of just a little bit of sharing of data and methodologies. Now, once the data is in WikiRate, there's a whole lot there. As I already said, it gets really complex. A question like who's a company, but also what is a sector? You know, if I say apparel, you can define that in lots of different ways, and which company is part of apparel. For instance, Zalando is a big one that in Germany is quite well known. Are they an apparel company? Maybe, maybe not. Are they a tech platform? Maybe, maybe not. You could really depend, it would depend on the topic issue area, how you would then classify them. So these are incredibly complex questions. And so all of this information is in this one place, and it can become really hard to understand what it is that you're looking at and how to then parse all that information to get interesting insights. So for us data geeks, that's an exciting space to play around in, but not everyone loves that. So what we have done is really said, okay, well, WikiRate is really the central hub, but from there we can create different lenses into that information. And so we wanted to make it really easy for people to extract pieces of that database, the entire database, or even set up connections to their own lenses. Now, I'll tell you in a minute what I mean with that. But yeah, I would invite anyone to play around with the data. You can get CSVs, you can get JSONs. If you have a data portal, you can plug in our API and get more data coming from our place as well, for instance, for a competitor analysis or something like that. So yeah, I really invite you. And if you would like to just kind of go through some of the data structures with us, we're happy to do that as well. So I'll be sharing my email address, so please feel free to reach out for that as well. Now then, what do I mean with creating their own lenses? Now this has to do with our API, and what we're trying to make possible is for our data experts, let's say, for instance, a civil society organization that works on the topic of wages. They know what their audience is interested in. They know what data their audience is interested in, and how their audience is able to engage with that information. Do they want to see visuals? Do they want to play around with something? Does it need to be dynamic? And so what we're doing is really setting up a direct link to our database, which becomes the data backend for then their own kind of lens, their own tool. Now, what that looks like is, for instance, something like this. So this is Fashion Checker. And this also comes back to my point that I mentioned earlier of triangulation. So what this organization has done and what we help them do with the tools and the data that we have is that they say, okay, we want to know what brands are committing to in their supply chains in terms of wages. So are they doing labor cost isolation? Are they committing to paying a living wage? And they've then collected all that information and created a dashboard where you can see an overview of how a company is scoring on that assessment that they did. In addition, we then mapped those brands to their suppliers through new disclosures that have been coming available over the past 3 to 4 years. These are called the supplier lists of these companies. And what we do is we extract the relationships between these entities. And so we know where are these brands sourcing their products from. Then what the civil society organization did is set up a research campaign to collect information from the workers that work in some of these facilities. Now, of course, there's thousands of suppliers, and it becomes quite a big volume of data that you need to collect and geographic area that you need to go across if you wanted to collect data on all of these factories. But they've assessed already over 100 facilities, and you need to also then interview, of course, many workers because you want to protect their privacy. So you aggregate that. But so we were able to get information about what the average wages were in these facilities, what the split was between men and women, so the demographic between permanent and temporary contracts. And so we were able to say, okay, if we have this brand and we know they produce in this facility, what are their commitments and what are the actual wages and conditions that these workers are facing? So really starting to triangulate that full picture. And in the first instance, what we noticed from that campaign is that brands were reducing what they were actually saying. Now, of course, that's a little scary because you don't want people to talk less about it. But after another cycle, we saw that brands were making more realistic commitments. And so that is really where this a very valuable impact piece comes. So it's not necessarily about checking, but it's more about adjusting how realistic some of the targets are, and also really taking steps to achieve those targets and having a mechanism to know whether that is the impact you're having as a brand as well. Another example is the Apparel 100 dashboard that we created. And this was really something that WikiRate itself decided to do. And the reason was that we saw a lot of different initiatives happening, and also initiatives starting to share data. So for instance, that fashion checker tool you just saw, they started out doing a brand survey and quickly realized that there is the Fashion Transparency Index, which surveys companies as well. And they were asking very similar questions. So these organizations talked, aligned their methodologies, and now the fashion checker no longer needs to do their own survey and bother companies with another survey, but actually we just have one survey going out to companies. They provide their information and it's feeding into lots of different projects. And so we saw there's lots of initiatives are starting to work together. So let's get an overview of what we really know about this sector. So this is a dashboard that is just giving a high level impression of the largest 100 apparel companies in terms of their market cap. And what information were we able to find from them through all of the different initiatives that we have and data that we have on WikiRate, which is about 30,000 data points. So it's quite a large scale initiative. We were able to see that we have a lot more disclosure on governance and policies and commitments, not so much about evidence of what the impacts are of those initiatives. There's a lot more about environment than there is about social indicators, which also makes a lot of sense, simply because, it's much easier to track emissions, a number, rather than a social indicator. So yeah, we were able to give a sense of the trends and really sketch out this bigger picture. And this again is just a visualization of a big data set that we have on WikiRate. And so it's really about these kinds of lenses that we're trying to create. And this is automated, right? So whenever new data comes into the database, these kinds of visualizations, dashboards, and infographics are updating automatically. And we're noticing that with the attention spans that keep getting shorter, these lengthy reports really aren't serving their purpose that well. It is much more about these dynamic tools that allow people to really engage with that information and really get to understand what the impacts are that companies have. So I'm going to leave it at this. I believe I've already been over time, but thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me. And yeah, happy to hear any questions you might have for me.
Thank you so much, Loreen, for this very insightful, precise presentation, how magic with numbers and data can look like. It's absolutely astonishing. I really love your project. We have already some questions floating in here. Just to remind the audience, if you had or have any questions, just type them into the Q&A box here at the navigation bar at the lower end of the Zoom screen. Now, we quickly change the perspective now. We've taken a broader perspective of what to do with the data. Now we want to get a closer look into how to collect data, maybe automatically, from Heiner Chochohai. Heiner, you are, as I mentioned, Managing Director at the BTC company, and you'll give some insights about how you structure ESG data to automate data collection and also visualization processes.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. Before starting, Loreen, I'm really amazed too. I remember like 15 years ago, I was a research scholar at Boston University and did some research on toxics in Massachusetts and how to avoid them. And there was an innovation. The guys at the public authority had a database where they stored all the data and made it public. And well, I had to go to that authority personally and ask for the data, download it, read through it. And I wonder what would have happened if WikiRates would have been in place already those days. So it's 4.0, I would call it, public disclosure 4.0, and good luck with that. I really like your mission. Thanks for sharing that with us. So yeah, as I said, I was a scholar one day, and I spent hours in lecture halls. And the thing is that you see the screen, I hope, yeah. Okay. I spent hours in lecture halls discussing about the right standards of sustainability reporting, and we compared standard 1 with standard 2 and had discussions all night long. And then we had other discussions how to encourage employees to support these processes. And at the end of the day, I was a bit puzzled and disappointed, because we spend our time in discussions about the standards and not the impact we create as sustainability officers. And this disappointed me a lot. Today, I'm with a top 10 IT service provider in the German market, which is BTC, Business Technology Consulting. And at BTC, we are handling B2B issues in accordance with what AWS does, what Microsoft does, and what SAP does. And for my colleagues, I learned the power of data integration can really alter things. And this is what I'm up to in sustainability management. I really believe that if we handle data in a proper way and in a sound IT architecture, we as sustainability officers can do things differently. We ultimately can change things and spend our time on discussions with colleagues and with us suppliers and so on, and do not spend our time on data collection. This is really a mess. Spending your time with data collection is a waste of time, and is a waste of really expensive time, because there's not much time left to do things differently. So my key message today is make use of data integration to have more time available for discussing things, for changing the way we do economy. So I'm going to present you for thesis, the way we are thinking on about how to organize your data if you're up to sustainability reporting and eventually sustainability controlling, I would say, because the reporting itself does not do anything besides given the possibility to have public discussions. So the first thing is that, I mean, it's not a new message to you guys, but having 3 different dimensions of sustainability means that you have an enormous amount of data. And the thing is not having 3 dimensions, but 3 conflicting dimensions. Because it's, to me, the interesting thing about sustainability management is that there's not one linear solution to each and every problem we have. But the thing is that we have to discuss things. We always have a conflict of goals that we have to moderate. And therefore, we have to be able to show these conflicts. And that, again, means not to show each dimension by dimension, but to integrate the data to show the conflicting goals. So that would be thesis 1, to say sustainability needs, by definition, data integration. So to show how the different indicators conflict with each other. There's no sense in having data purely on economic things and environmental things and social things, but we have to show how they interact with each other. And therefore, I think the more data from different processes can be integrated, the better our ambition is achieved. Now, the second thesis is an accountability report by definition shows things ex post. So the moment we report something, things already happened. So we cannot do anything about the very moment we conceive a situation where we don't like things. So let's take energy management as the prominent example, where we wish to alter things in real time. So think about a situation where you're using energy in a way which you don't want to do, which you don't want to prolong anymore. You want to do something in the very moment. So this is what energy management is up to. Now, energy management, things like processes which you manage in ISO 50001 processes, right now are totally dislinked from sustainability management issues. Once a year, you ask your energy manager about the total data you saw, but what if you can directly link the real-time data you have in energy management with all the other issues you're dealing with in sustainability management? So thesis 2 is you should have the ambition to integrate real-time data into your sustainability management. Forget about presenting numbers once a year and aim for real-time data. Now, as Laureen already told us, there's a bunch of new regulations coming up these days. Just think about the Sustainability Due Diligence Directive and all the implications it's going to have on the supply chain. Right now, we cannot imagine what this will create on an additional data lakes, so to say. And for the moment, at least this is my hope, that there will be even more wiki rates in the world, aiming up to connect all the different data sources and so on. So the basic message is, if you're up to creating an IT which supports you, you should think about the tomorrow's regulations and not today's regulations, which basically means if sustainability reporting is becoming more comprehensive year by year, you should be very flexible in creating your IT architecture. Do not focus on what's happening now by means of regulation, but focus on the things which might be coming up. Now, the good message is there were 3 occasions on which the demand for a sound IT architecture is becoming bigger and bigger. Now, thesis 4 is there is no problem, because the D for digitalization allows us to integrate data much better these days than a few years ago. Me personally, I know sustainability software as a tool which helped me to show a specific indicator. I know companies which have a tool for carbon disclosure, then you have a tool for environmental management, then you have a tool on energy management. And the good message is you can easily combine these data by means of integrating data from your environment, from your enterprise resource planning system. These ERP systems became much better the last years, and therefore digitalization allows intelligent sustainability management. As I said a moment ago, we learned that we have an IT tool for each and every issue we're dealing with in sustainability management. We have our standards, then we have EU taxonomy, we have our own claims in sustainability management. And what we've learned throughout the last 2 or 3 decades is that we have specified IT tools for each and everything. One for reporting, one for the guys from finance to comply with the EU taxonomy things. Then you have your own ideas from your own management, and then you have all the different things like data from the HR department and environmental issues and so on. And we learned that we have specific tools for each and every issue. But how to get relevant data into that application, or these different applications? Well, throughout the 2 last decades, we learned you should be in close collaboration with your sustainability officer, or the sustainability officer has to know each and every special branch in the company in order to get the relevant data. And this is a personal individual link. Person A asks for data, and person B might disclose the data if the two can work good together. A second way is to have user interfaces. So that was pronounced the modern way. There's no need to send files around. You can have a web interface to enter your data. And those of you dealing with carbon disclosure projects, you know what I'm talking about. There's some central guys asking you for data, and then you get a link to a web interface and can type in your data, and everybody is happy. Actually, to my understanding, this is too little. We can do even better. And that is why, and Laureen reference to that in her presentation. Of course, we have APIs for each and everything. Yeah, we have this application interface, and you can easily connect your data. Now, the thing is, having an API for each and every tool means to organize the data for each and every tool in a different way every time. An API is just nothing else but a door through which you can bring data, basically. It doesn't say anything about the way you're bringing the data into the house. Now, I think manual data collection is quite a bad number. We shouldn't spend that much time on having super smart tools for each and every issue you're dealing with, but we think you should care about your sustainability data warehouse, because the data is already available. That's the key message. You have enterprise resource planning tools in those companies which have to disclose the data. The data is already there. Let's take a gasoline bill, for instance. The data is already included. You have the liters of diesel and fuel, and by this you can easily calculate the carbon impact. For instance, you have the monetary numbers. Of course, sometimes the right metric is missing, and you have to calculate the data, but it's already there. So let's use it and spend your time on creating impact rather than data collection. And referring to my example from energy management, of course, there are other data sources to be included. And the thing is, if you have a smart way to create your sustainability data warehouse, you can easily connect to smart tools in an efficient way, rather than connecting each and every tool directly to the enterprise resource planning system. So that is the key message. To put it in another way, and if you look on the button there, you have JSON again. Laureen reference to it. So you have data in different formats, in different ways, and it shouldn't be the obligation of sustainability officers to care about the formats. The good message is the data is there and you can handle with it. Now, the thing is, again, create your sustainability data warehouse and put the data in buckets, which then can be used by specialized tools, is much more efficient than to go through this process for each and every tool again. What we call is the presentation is the layer you see as a user, which you see as someone in the management or in the sustainability department. It shouldn't be a nerd thing to create your own dashboards. Dashboards must be created in a minute, especially in the moment you're up to looking into data, given a special presentation, or trying to show scenarios where things could be different. So creating dashboards should be done in a minute, and I'm pretty sure Colin and was are happy to show you how this can be done in WeShyft, for instance. And these tools should focus on creating impact, and how to get the data into this presentation layer should be done by the mean of what we call sustainability data warehouse. And this is where the sustainability intelligence comes into the game. The thing is extracting the data from the sources where the data is already there, having it available on a middle layer, and then easily report it to things we call dashboards. I'm done with the time, so I skipped the commercial part. I'm pretty sure you can think, if you want to learn about something, your IT architecture, BTC would be there. So forget about the commercials, and thanks for having me here, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Heiner, so much for your presentation. Just to comment on that, you guys can download the presentation, and if you're eager to know more about the offers of BTC concerning sustainability data warehousing, you'll find it in the presentation. Now, I think we have now really come from a very broad perspective into a very narrow perspective that really deals with the operational issues in how to collect data from various sources. Once more, I'd like to remind you that we are happy if you guys put some questions into our Q&A tool. We have already seen some questions here, and Laureen, I just saw that you have already answered some of the questions. However, I would quickly like to start with one of the two questions you have already answered, which is there is a lot of noise around ESG data and ESG portals. How do you retain clarity in all this? And do you think the market is too saturated to enter it?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So there is a lot happening, and I think that has to do with just that we are really proliferating data, right? Almost, we're in the 21st century, and you don't take a decision without that being funded in evidence and yeah, data. So I think data is catching on, and that's what we're seeing also in all of these data tools that are being provided, platforms that are popping up left and right, all taking slightly different approach and selling it slightly different to you. So yeah, there's a lot happening there, and there's, I would say, indeed saturation. At the same time, WeCurate is in quite a different position because we're not selling anything. And so we really work with those that don't have the resources to buy data, but also don't necessarily have a lot of tech know-how or data skills. So civil society, they do research, and it's, you know, somewhere in the spreadsheets, and at one point the person who did the research left the organization and nobody knows where the spreadsheet is anymore. So there's a lot of that that's happening, and what we're really doing is archiving it and bringing some of that tech and data know-how to those organizations so that their data remains impactful, and we can also over time start to see what is happening. So our approach is a little bit different. What I did also put in the answer in the chat is that one of the things that I think is important to realize is that it's going to be a very short amount of time that these ESG data platforms can really compete for your attention, because soon that data is going to be very easy to access. I mean, that's within the next 10 years, let's say. So, and that's already being, you know, quite conservative in my opinion. So I think what you'll see is that they need to start to shift focus from selling the data to selling analysis. And that's really how you're going to see some of these big guys pivot.
Now there's a second question relating to that. Are there things for a company to avoid to do when reporting their sustainability performance according to the new upcoming CSRD, if their goal is also to make their sustainability data available, readable to tools like WikiRates? So in other words, do you have to keep something in mind if you want to provide data through a sustainability report and put that data into the WikiRates platform, for example?
Yeah, so the first crucial step is I think a shift in mindset of who is really going to these sustainability reports, right? We've always thought about it as the investor, and they're going to sit down with a cup of coffee and read, you know, 80 pages. I mean, that rarely happens for investors already. And although the glossy reports can be really useful, especially for those who don't have a lot of knowledge about all these issue areas. So I wouldn't necessarily say forget about all of that, but I would keep in mind that machines are now also your audience. And so you, as Heiner was already saying, really you need to think about what is the standardization that you can do. Can you provide it in an Excel sheet? So have a download or an export from your internal systems to then make that available on your website, for instance. In the EU, you're going to be asked to submit your data to different portals from the different member states, and that's going to feed into this one European single access point. Now, it's all a really grand idea. There's still a lot of question marks and magic in the roadmap, so I'm not going to say that's going to solve all of our problems, but we're definitely seeing some really big steps being taken there. And so you're already going to need to adjust your way of providing data to external parties in a way that machines can handle it. Very important there, also very basic, is what company does the data refer to? Are you reporting on a global level, on subsidiary levels? So we need to know who these companies are. And that can be including a company ID. So if I say Coca-Cola, of course, not a lot of others will be called Coca-Cola. But when we get to the smaller companies, often there's very similar names. How do we know who's who? So addresses and metadata about the entities is really, really important, as well as saying, what reporting period are you talking about? So at what point do we start to do the measurement, and what point does the measurement end, right? So there's all these kinds of things that a machine will be looking for, so that we know how to assign the data to all the different buckets we have. And if you can provide more of that metadata, what indicator have you used from the GRI index, for instance, all of that is incredibly useful for machines to process what you're putting out there.
Yeah. And
I'd like to
I'd like to underline the issue of metadata, because especially in complex situations like supply chains, I think the number of instances per year where you have to exchange data will dramatically increase. And we already see that there are initiatives in certain industries to discuss how to share the data. Just think about the Scope 3 emission calculating challenge. And therefore, having a certain stamp on your data saying, okay, I'm from reporting period A, I belong to company this and that, to branch da da da. This is very important to bring that data together with your carbon data, human resources data, also on. So make sure that you have this metadata stamp on the original data.
Yeah, and maybe if I can very briefly add, with the CSRD specifically, we're not there yet. It still needs to go to Parliament. You know, there's still the public consultation, which for some of you might also be very interesting, starting, I believe, next week and running till the end of July, where you can also give your feedback on what is being proposed to the EU Parliament on this legislation. For those of you who want to know more, happy to stay in touch, just send me a message. But there, a lot of the advice is already going in this metadata direction as well. And that's going to make it easier for you to hook up internal systems with external systems. And the tool that in the EU is being talked about a lot is XBRL. We don't know yet if that is exactly the tool they're going to really kind of push forward, but that's definitely a system that if you don't know it, take a look and just make yourself a little bit more familiar with how that could work for you.
Yeah, thanks for the advice, Loreen. Heine, I want to follow up on your comment. Let's say a company wants to build an ESG architecture, data architecture, as you have mentioned. Can you maybe, from your experience, talk us a little bit through the different steps that need to be taken to end up with an architecture as you just described it? So what would be the first 3 things I need to do as a company?
Well, the first is, do you have your strategy in place? So did the company went through the processes we know from all the standards? This doesn't, for the most of you, I guess, doesn't ring a bell. However, there's an enormous amount of companies around there who are now obliged by the financial market to report data which haven't been reported in a good way the last year. So that would be the first question. Do you have your strategy in place? Secondly, what is the way you organize these days? So how does the information flow through the company? Does it flow by means of personal collaboration with the sustainability officer? Do you have things like how do you use your Microsoft environment these days? To our knowledge, Excel is the thing in the market to share data. Yeah, we have an Excel template for the reporting. Okay, so take that serious, because the idea of how to structure the architecture is already in there. It's absolutely inefficient. It's not easy to store that data once someone left the company. However, the idea of the architecture is already in these templates. So you've been good advice if someone looked into your Excel templates. And then finally, you should have a close look in what kind of data you already have in your enterprise resource planning system. What are the other data sources? And then you can start of how to extract the data by means of AI, for instance, robotic process automation. So there's so many smart tools already in place to extract the data without having any human interference. But this is the third step. The first, of course, have a look on the strategy. The second is, how is the sustainability program organized? And then you look for the data sources. And at the end, you will have an idea of how wide the gap is to a sound IT architecture. And I would say the fifth step then is to think about the tools you're going to use by means of disclosure. But this is already the fifth step.
Now, you kind of mentioned that have your strategy in line and do your materiality analysis, let's say 2 processes that should have been done before you start inventing or reorganizing a data architecture. Now, those things are, let's put it in terms of data, qualitative data aspects. I was wondering, and I'd like to ask both of you, how do we deal with all the qualitative data that is out there now, and there is companies are still asked to provide a lot of qualitative data. If we think about governance indicators, most of them are qualitative. How do we deal with those kind of data? Because, you know, if we are in these data discussions, we typically focus on numbers, not so much on text elements. What's your guess on that? How do we deal with that kind of data? How does BTC deals with it? How does Wikirates deals with it? Because there's a lot of important information in there.
Yeah, Loreen, you want to answer? Or I'm going forward with a tech answer.
Yeah, please go ahead. I will follow.
Yeah. Okay, so the at BTC we're techies, so our answer would be use the new technologies and use the digitalization, and that would be AI, for instance. We have projects in many aspects going on where we do text analysis of ticket systems, for instance, and you can easily do this with annual reports and qualitative data stemming from biodiversity reportings, for instance. And there you can train your system to extract the data, for instance, to put it, to convert it then in a metric way and bring it through your system. So our answer would be use the technologies which are already there to optimize the way of analyzing the data.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, so very often, for instance, around the SDGs, we get this question. Companies are reporting to the SDGs, what initiatives do they have on the different SDGs? And then it's actually very bespoke. It's very unique to that company, what program they set up to tackle some issues that they're facing, right? So in those cases, it can be really hard to turn it into something quantitative. But let me talk you through an example that does that. So for instance, a grievance mechanism is something that, depending on what sector you're in, can look very different. But there are some similarities between the types of things that you might be doing. The first question that is quantitative is, do you have one? Yes or no? Then, is it translated into the local languages in production countries? Yes or no? And so you can always go more and more granular and then still have some space. And what we do is with comments and free text capture, really, what is the explanation that you want to add there? What is the evidence that you want to add there that hasn't already been kind of tackled with those quantitative measures? And that is then something that we can also capture. And maybe in the future, we can have an algorithm and a tool that goes through all of that and then still finds more themes that we can standardize and turn into quantitative measures, right? So we're also kind of trying to track as much of the qualitative free text as we can, so that we can in future maybe still adapt that and use tools to improve that measurement.
Sorry, now the door rings, but I guess that's only the postman. There's a follow-up question, I guess, for you, Loreen. How do you deal with different definitions or scopes by companies of topics, e.g. biodiversity, when ultimately trying to compare different companies?
Yes, that's an excellent question. And I can tell, Andre, that you're also loving data as much as I do. So biodiversity is a typical example that is very, very hard to measure, just because the definitions are so broad. Everyone gives it their own definition. Everyone slots in their own issue areas. So I think that is quite difficult in general. And so we see a lot of what we call bad quality data coming into our space. That doesn't mean we don't capture it. We want to show what is there currently, what is the best that we've got, right? But another example, again, is coming back to grievances. We have an indicator of GRI, and we have one company reporting 17,000 grievances reported in one given year, whereas the majority of companies will say 0. That doesn't mean they don't know. It means they know and there's 0 grievances that were reported. Now that's a huge variance, right? And so what we do also by aggregating is that we can see those kinds of variants, and that tells us something is off here. Either they're defining a grievance differently, Maybe a lot of companies have a mechanism that doesn't work. People aren't comfortable to report things. And so that's really when you can dig into those kinds of questions and say, are companies really on the same page when they are reporting this information? And that's a tool or a system that we actually engage our standard setters in to then improve their methodology and go into defining much more clearly what it is that they expect of companies.
Yeah, thanks for this answer. I see that we have already hit 1:30, and therefore, even though I would love to discuss the whole day with you guys, I think we have to come. We need to come to an end. And therewith, I really like to thank both of you for taking the time, share insights with us. I think lots of inspiring ideas, at least in my head. Yeah, thank you so much, both of you. I guess both of you will be available if there are any follow-up questions. I think your contact information are on the slides, or you just Google your names.
Yes.
Anyhow, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Really love
great.
this.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
That's great impact.
Yeah, let's create impact. That's
yes.
a good ending. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye. Take care.